Powered by Righteous Media. Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, welcome to Independent Americans. Welcome to episode 353. I'm your host, Paul Rieckhoff. Now is definitely a time to stay vigilant. Free speech is under attack. Trump has given a radioactive speech at the United Nations. The United States military is striking vessels off the coast of Venezuela. The Secretary of Defense is trying to silence the press inside the Pentagon. And there are elections happening this year, next year, where independents are continuing to rise and meet this moment of division and toxicity. And we are continuing our ongoing Meet the Independent Candidate series with a very special guest coming in from California. The great and powerful Ethan Penner is our guest on Independent Americans. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure always to be with you.
So you're stepping into the breach. The country feels like it's on fire, and you are running as an independent in California. Congratulations on your announcement, which just happened, I think, yesterday or the day before, formally.
Yes.
Thank you for making this show one of your first visits. This is a community that wants to hear from you, wants to get to know you. Many will want to support you. Let me start with the question I ask everybody. Where are you and how are you?
Well, I'm in Los Angeles, or in the outskirts of Los Angeles, California, and I'm doing well. I'm blessed with a beautiful family who supports me in this effort, who sees the value of living a purposeful life, who sees that now is not the time to run away and hide or to be shy. Now's the time to step it up and make the contribution that we all need to make if we want the society that we want. You know, if we're going to go get it, we're going to go get it. And I think that my family support is a very big part of this for me. And you know, I think that so many times, Paul, we hear the refrain at elections: how is it that in a country this big or in a state as big as California, we're getting these two choices, you know, with the implication being that there are so many great people in our country, and why are we left with these choices? And I'm running in direct opposition to that.
So I'm excited to dig into that. You want to be an alternative. We know that now the largest group of voters in America are independents. We've talked to Rick Bennett last week. We've had Angus King. We've had many veterans that are running. Your background is a little bit different. So let me just ask you to tell everyone, who are you, Ethan? Give them your background and what has brought you to this moment where you want to decide to run for the governor of the great state of California.
Well, I think that's a very important question, Paul. The why do you think, you know, when you wake up in the morning, you say, I'm going to be the governor of California. That's by the way, when that happened for me, and I did wake up one morning and I did have that thought, the words left my mouth even when I told my wife and my kids that day, very timidly, right? Because it really is such a big deal, right? To take that on, and the implication being that you really think you're qualified to do that, right? And well, I actually do. You know, so I'm a 64-year-old man. I've lived a very full life. I started off at the bottom of the socioeconomic barrel, and my parents were divorced when I was quite young. My mom raised me in the mean streets of Yonkers, New York, with my brother. And I say that tongue in cheek, but it was a tough place, right? There was no suit and tie workers in my neighborhood. It was a rough and tumble kind of street education. My mom worked her butt off as a school teacher and as a secretary, just trying to make ends meet and pay the bills. And I watched her suffer. And I've been working since I'm 9 years old because I couldn't imagine asking her for money. I saw how hard her life was just to make rent and pay for food. So that was my life through college. I lived at home with my mom and my little brother. and helped her with the house really through college. And then I started off in finance at the very bottom of the barrel, the very bottom. I had no one in my family had ever worked in finance or business. So after college, I moved out to California. My dad had moved to California after the divorce, and so I'd gotten to know California since I was 8 years old. And of course, when you're from Yonkers, New York, and you see California, you go like, "This is definitely a pretty good place,"
Hmm.
especially back then. And so it wasn't hard for me to want to live in California. And I started my adult life and my career in California at a small savings and loan, which is a bank specializing in mortgages with and 10 years later I worked my way to the from the very bottom of the field of finance to the very pinnacle of the world of finance. I was at the top of the food chain on Wall Street, and I guess I would say my life is the definition of the American dream, the realization of social mobility, which is why every single immigrant from our founding fathers on forward came here. They came here for the pursuit of social mobility, to move up because they couldn't move up in places where they were. They were stuck. And so uh, I achieved that, and for me, these are part of the fabric of my DNA, right? The seeing the suffering of my mother and seeing how the toll it took on her life, and she unfortunately passed from cancer at 64, and I attribute it to the years of struggle, the years of hard work with no joy, and then my own journey of trying to make good so I can take care of my mother and take care of my family and the ability to kind of rise up through hard work and ambition with no one to help me and make it to the top and feel that kind of fulfillment of the American dream. This is part of my DNA, and this is what I want to have available to everybody. I want this American dream that has been so beautiful for me, so fulfilling for me, to be available again. And I really don't see it's there today. I really think that worse than that, I think people have lost hope in it. I don't think people believe it's there. And so, to a certain extent, Paul, I'm sure you've seen it in your own life, belief leads outcome. The life, to a very large extent, is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we believe things are possible, we will invest everything for that. And of course, when we invest everything, we have a pretty good shot of getting something. But if we believe it's impossible, well, we're not going to invest. It would be illogical. And when we choose to not invest ourselves, the outcome is also predictably bad. So, so I want to return this belief in the American dream, which then I think will lead to the fulfillment of the American dream. I see, as you do, a lot of conflict in the world, which is, of course, the independent path, which is to say both parties are playing to the worst in humanity, where I think leadership is about elevating the best in humanity. And I've written two books. I'm very proud of those books. And they're really about creating a higher level of awareness and elevating people. I've taught at business school for the last decade for that same purpose. I think leaders are teachers. I think leaders are influencers for the positive, and I think leaders are not indoctrinators, but people who inspire others to be the very best version of themselves.
So I love a lot of that, and I want to unpack a lot of it, especially in this moment where the country is so divided. I also want to recognize that Yonkers is no joke. I grew up not far from Yonkers. You and I talked about this when we met a couple weeks ago in Washington, D.C. for the first time. And you kind of lived a lot of the dreams of a kid like me, like you, growing up in New York. You know, I had dreams of California, playing linebacker at UCLA and living in Malibu, right? That's the dream you go up with, and you've gotten that dream, and now you want to kind of share that contagious energy, which I think is important because you're approaching this as a moderate, as a centrist, and we're going to unpack that. But so you've got the business approach, but you're also enlightened in a California kind of way, right? There's like a spirit of the beach and the hippie in you, right? So you're melding those two in a way that might meet the moment. But let's talk about this moment. I mean, the Charlie Kirk assassination has been like a bomb going off in our soul here in America. Jimmy Kimmel was shut down. Now he's back on the air. The country feels very divided, feels very angry, feels on the cusp of violence almost daily. Can you talk about the opportunity that you have as an independent to meet that moment, and specifically in California, right? I mean, California is going to be loved by liberals, hated by conservatives, and unfortunately, like so many other things in this country, it's been kind of, I think, misaligned along partisan lines. But there's a deeper California. Like I love California very deeply. It's one of my favorite countries in the world, and I call it that because it is very different from the rest of America in the same way New York is. But talk about how your leadership can uniquely meet this moment, and your leadership approach to bringing together California at this time where, like so much of the country, it feels divided.
Well, let me start with California because you spoke about California in a very interesting and I think very positive and glowing way from a historical perspective. And I feel the same way. The first time I laid my eyes on California, I was an 8-year-old kid from Yonkers. I was 1970, and
Mm.
I came here and I thought, oh my God, this is truly heaven, right? And I visited my dad at least once a year for a month or so, 3 weeks in the summer and Christmas time, and I couldn't wait to come here. And then I moved here as soon as I could after college, and I've split my adult life probably 30% New York and about 70% California. But I think California is magic, and it unfortunately has lost its magic, like
Mm.
unfortunately like New York too. Like I loved New York. New York's not the New York that I loved. It's a different New York because we live in these times where there's no community, where we've been polarized by the political divide, which has been exacerbated by the media that's been created to kind of support that divide. And I think that um, I don't know, playing to the lowest common denominator, uh, kind of talking to the hate and the clannishness that is in every one of us, right? We all have that inclination. We're all flawed. We're human beings, and we all have the potential for good and the bad. It's easier to destroy than it is to build, and it's easier to appeal to our darkest side than our lightest side and to elevate. It's hard work to elevate. And I think that in the interest of commerce, in the interest of expedience, we've now got a society that plays to our darkness pretty much all the time. And so here's the world we end up with. And I think that California, the California that I loved, you referenced it, it had this kind of magical kind of combination of hedonism and spirituality. It was a weird combination, right? But
Hmm.
it was both, right? And I think that I'm going to embrace a version of that, maybe more on the spiritual side than the hedonistic side at this point in my life. Um, but fun is fun too, right? There's nothing wrong with fun, right? California is by nature a fun place, right? It's the beaches and it's nature and it's the mountains and we have fun in California. We're supposed to have fun in California. We're supposed to have fun in life. And so I want to bring a joyous spirituality to my leadership style and to people. And I want to show people a better way than the way that they're being shown today.
I think that's really important in this moment, especially. And it's part of why I do this show and part of why I want to do this series with independents. Last week we talked with Rick Bennett, who talked about love, which you don't hear, hard scrabble politicians talk a lot about love. But when I'm with my two little boys and I'm with kindergartners and I'm coaching my softball team, we talk about love, we talk about respect, we talk about kindness, right? And to hear you talk about fun, to hear you talk about joy, also in an aspirational sense, because there's a reality that not everybody is getting enough of that joy and not getting enough of the great California dream. I think if I was like you and went there when I was 9 instead of when I was in my 20s for the first time, I probably never would have come back. I mean, I understand that. We can all relate to that. But there's also this deeper side of the dream unfulfilled, which we see in California, we see in New York, we see definitely in Washington, and to some extent, we see in America. But part of why it's been unfulfilled for independents is because they can't win. So how are you going to step into this breach now as an independent? And you're a businessman, you're a strategist. What is your strategy to do what really hasn't been done? Maybe Schwarzenegger is the closest recent example. How can you win as an independent candidate for governor in this political environment?
Well, I have to be known. Okay, that's the biggest, and I have to have a good strategy. But I would say this, Paul, this is a moment in time. One of the things I've learned in my career is that there is no such thing as the man for all seasons or the woman for all seasons. There is the man or woman for this season, right? This particular season.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I look at my own career. I had a kind of a magical moment in the early 1990s when the real estate industry had completely lost its funding from banks and insurance companies. I had no experience in real estate, but I had deep experience and was a leader in structured finance. And I realized that I could bring structured finance solutions to the real estate industry and solve its existential problem. And I became known in my early 30s as the pioneer of modern day real estate finance because I did that. But I was a complete outsider who was able to see things that insiders couldn't see. And I would say 99 out of 100 years or 100 times, outsiders are unwelcome. Insiders don't want to hear from outsiders. The only time they want to hear from an outsider is when their backs are against the wall and they fear the end is near. Okay. And so
Mm-hmm.
Schwarzenegger, it's interesting you mentioned him, an amazing man, right? Just an amazing guy. Look at what he's accomplished with his life. And unfortunately for California, Schwarzenegger became governor at a time when people didn't really want to hear new ideas. They didn't want to, they were not at the end of their wits. They were not panicked. They hadn't given up on California. He came along, California, like the United States, had a straight bull market run pretty much for 50 years leading up to 2000. He came shortly after that. Things were not as good, perhaps, as they had been in the prior 50 years, but the 50-year bull run was right in the rearview mirror. And so they just assumed things would self-correct. They were not willing to throw in the towel and adopt wholesale changes, which is what Schwarzenegger had hoped to accomplish. And so the will of the people didn't pressure the legislators to play ball with Schwarzenegger, and he was frustrated by that. Now, if you fast forward 20 years later, we now have 20 years of unbelievable failure by any measure in the state of California. California doesn't resemble the California we fell in love with, and it doesn't resemble the California of the past. And so, and the statistics, that's the thing is, this is not subjective, this is objective. So for your listeners, they might be shocked to know. I'm shocked when I say this, and I say it often now, we're literally 50th out of 50 states in a number of very important metrics for measuring a society's success. We're last in the country in homelessness. So we have by far the largest by percent and number homeless population. We're last in the country in by measures of poverty, both by number, the absolute number of people that are living in or near the poverty line, and by percentage, which is shocking. Okay, we have 31% of our people living at or it's a federal measure at or near the poverty line. We are last in affordability. So it's the least affordable place in the country to live, which is
Mm-hmm.
painful for most people, very painful, right? Makes living very hard. Um, we're last, this is unbelievable, in unemployment. We have the highest percentage and absolute number of unemployed of any state in the country. So you have four critical measures of a society, and we're last, dead last. We're behind Mississippi, Alabama, states that have a history of not necessarily great economic success. We're behind everyone. And we are also last, which again, when you take those first four, what I'm going to tell you now shouldn't be surprising. We've been dead last for 5 consecutive years in net migration, which means people are fleeing our state,
Right.
companies are fleeing our state, and they're preferring to move anywhere but here. We're the last choice for people moving in the United States. Now, this is California. This is the most beautiful place on earth. And for us to have those statistics is a gigantic capitulation moment. So how do I, as an independent, have a chance? It's only in a moment like this. It's like that real estate moment. When the industry was literally in a moment of capitulation, they were willing to listen to an outside 32-year-old young man
Mm-hmm.
who had some outside ideas. Guess what? This is that moment for the state of California, and I think I'm the person for this season, I believe.
So I want to get to the specifics on how you're going to tackle all those things. But before I do, I want to stay on the question of independent and independence because you are now part of defining the national narrative of what it means to be independent. We've had a lot of different folks from a lot of different parts of the country, and I always ask them the same question. Why are you an independent, and how do you define independent?
Well, there are many good answers to that question, and I'm sure you've heard as you've been interviewing other independents, their answers. I would start by saying that I've always been an independent free thinker human being. I'm a natural outsider. I wrote a few books as I mentioned, and one of them has a check called Greatness is a Choice, and one of my chapters talks about how greatness could never be found in the herd by definition, right? Because, greatness means you're kind of choosing to be outside the herd, right? The herd is the average, and greatness is not found in average, right? It's found in extraordinary. And so I think that I've always believed in stretching myself to pursue greatness. And that makes me a natural independent human being, an independent thinker, someone who's looking for out of the box solutions because the other thing is I think that I want to bring value every day to everyone I meet. I think that's an important goal for me as a human being. It should be for everyone. And value is best brought by meeting unmet needs. So that already pulls you out of the kind of herd, if you will, because you're trying to meet unmet needs. You're an independent thinker, so I think that starts with who you are. You either are an independent thinker or you may want to try to become one. I think I would advise everyone to try to find that in them because it's
Hmm.
fulfilling, but I'm
Hmm.
naturally that. And then I would say, as I observe the political landscape today, the pull of the parties, um, there's a natural corruption in politics that I'm sure your listeners are all aware of, Paul. There's a natural corruption. It doesn't exist in any other business. So when I thought about my finance career, when I started, I just wanted to make money. I was poor. I had to take care of my mom. I had to take care of my family. So if you proposed a deal with me, let's say you came to me, you said, have this deal. And I said, look, Paul, I'd love to do a deal with you, but I'm not going to make money. This is a loser for me. Okay. I'm sorry, but we're not going to do this deal. There would be no conflict. It's pure. I'm just being straight with you. That's not going to work for me. And
Right.
there's no hard feelings. I haven't betrayed anyone's trust. My investors who trust me with their money are appreciative of the fact that my interests are aligned with theirs. I don't want to lose their money and I don't want to lose my own, right? And you're fine because I'm straight with you. But in politics, the career ambition naturally is at odds with service. Okay. If you're in the Democrat or Republican Party and you're a career politician, your career goals are to advance your career, maximize your success of your career. And in today's world, doing that means cultivating relationships with special interests that will afford you that career growth. And those special interests have they themselves have demands of you, right? There's a trade-off. Like we'll support you in your career, but you're going to take care of us when the rubber meets the road. And sometimes taking care of them, and maybe often taking care of them, is at odds with your commitment to the people who voted for you. So there's this inherent conflict in politics in the two-party system. As an independent, I don't have the support of any special interests. And that's good and bad, right? It means that I'm not going to win very easily because I don't have money being thrown at me because of traditional expectations that come with either party. At the same time, it's very good. I'm pure in my ability to serve the people who I'm running to serve. And I think that to me is the essence of the independent movement today. It's the freedom to actually do your job, which is to serve.
So can we talk about the landscape, which is important here because we talk a lot about leaders, but we also talk about the voting infrastructure that can either empower or cripple an independent candidate's chances. We've talked to folks like Jim Walden. We talked to Rick Bennett about Maine. California is an interesting situation, right? Because you're going to have a nonpartisan top two primary next June, right? So for
Right.
you, you've got to get in the top two, right? If you beat, even if the Democrats there, and I looked, I mean, there's like potentially 16 or so different people running in this race. It may be the most wide open race ever. So, they will call you a long shot candidate, but you're also in a unique environment where there's something like 12 different potential Democrats from Padilla to Katie Porter. There'll be a Republican. There'll always be some kind of wacky independent or unaffiliated. But I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you got to be top two by next June, right?
Correct.
And then if you're
Correct.
top two, then it's anybody's ball game, right? And you're
Well,
positioning yourself as a moderate.
I don't even see it that way. I see
Yeah.
it better than that way, Paul. I
Please
think
tell me how
if,
you see it.
so. If I'm top two, I'm the governor. It's actually that simple, okay?
Okay.
And so for me, being the next governor means getting 1.5 million primary votes. People think, my God, California is this massive country, as you said. There's
Mhm.
40 million Californians. How is a guy like you, who's unknown by most of those 40 million, how are you going to get known by 40 million people? Well, if that was the goal, I wouldn't actually be trying this because that would be impossible. Okay. The good thing is I don't have to be known by 40 million people. And then the next, maybe the next level of questioning is, well, there's 23 million registered voters. How are you going to get known by 23 million registered voters? And again, if that was the challenge, I wouldn't be running. Okay. Because that's too hard. Then when you look and say, well, there's been a history of about 7.5 million voters in gubernatorial primaries. Oh, okay. Well, do I need to get known by 7.5 million people? Not really. Okay, because I don't expect to get 100% vote share. Okay. My mother taught me not everyone's going to like you.
Hmm.
And for no good reason. They may just not like guys with brown hair, or in my case now, gray hair. Um, uh, so so what am I really after? And then create a campaign for that. Well, I'm after 1.5 million primary votes. That would get me 20%. And give or take that, that would guarantee that I'm in the final two. So somewhere around 18 to 22% is where the top two vote getters will end up. Now, I think that in the state of California, given our electorate, which is about 50% registered voters, are Democrats, and we're a pretty blue state, it's safe to assume one of these two finals will go to a Democrat. Okay.
Yep.
And and the Democrats, perhaps like the Republicans, but even in California more so, are dependent upon their special interests. So they are supported to a very large extent by the teachers union, by one or two other unions, and the way those unions will determine who that one person will be. And right now there are 5 or 6 career politician Democrats that are all fighting each other, and that fighting is going to get increasingly intense for the support of those big unions. Okay, they're not fighting me because I'm not in the game for that, right? I'm in a
Hmm.
different game. So they're going to beat each other up to be anointed, essentially anointed, okay? Not elected, but anointed,
Right.
which is interesting because the Democratic Party seems to have that inclination of anointing. It doesn't usually work out very well, by the way, as we saw in the last presidential election.
Yep.
But they're going to have an anointed lead dog Democrat, and that person will be in the final two. There's no question about that. And then the question is, who's going to be the second person? In the other person in that final two. It is highly unlikely to be a Republican. And the state of California has been very unkind to Republicans for the last for a long time, really, because
Right.
Arnold really wasn't a Republican. Arnold was a movie star. So you have to go back to Pete Wilson in the 1990s. The last time it was 1994 when Pete Wilson, I think, won a gubernatorial election. So we're talking almost now ancient history. Since then, Republican candidates have not fared very well. The Republican Party, particularly this Republican Party, polls extremely negatively in the state of California.
Yep.
So I think that it's very unlikely to be a Republican. And I don't think it's likely to be a second Democrat because I think, again, that lead dog Democrat's going to suck up the air in the Democratic Party. So it leads, and here's the thing. I talked about the record of California. So there, in the Democratic Party, there are, in my mind, you could break it into two groups. The hopeless ideologues, the brainwashed, if you will. I'm going to use that word. It's a controversial word, but I do unfortunately think that we have a brainwashed populace within our population today. They're not going to consider a person like me. They're not going to listen to me. They look at me and they may label me one way or another, but they're not going to listen to my message. They're not open to me. Um, but I do think as many as half of the registered Democrats are not that way. I think that they are sensible human beings like you and I.
Yep.
They either own businesses or they have decent jobs or they have children they care about or they are young people who are trying to make it in this state and finding it very hard for the reasons the statistics kind of reflect. And they're looking for an alternative, but they're not looking for a MAGA alternative. They're not looking for a Republican alternative.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
the only person they could look to, right? I'm the natural place
Yeah,
they.
I think I mean, this is a very smart strategy, right? And I think it's very Bloomberg-esque to me. I mean, you're a
Very
finance
Bloomberg,
guy.
very
You
Bloomberg.
ran the numbers, right? You ran the numbers and you figured out how you can shoot the hole, right? And that's really, I think, a smart approach. And it's going to be interesting to watch because it's also going to have kind of an interesting, maybe bizarro parallel in New York next year, where you're going to have likely Kathy Hochul, who's going to be incredibly unpopular. You've got a Republican Party that's very unpopular. There's an opportunity there potentially for an independent, especially someone with celebrity status or someone who can self-fund. But I think that this is the next head of the curve, right? This is the point. We talked about how Maine and Nebraska and other places are setting the stage for disruption. But I think the way the primary is set up in California, especially, and the toxicity of the brands of the Democrats and Republicans create this very real opportunity for you. And you're going to have to run, a dynamic campaign. You're going to have to either self-fund or raise a shitload of money. Are you planning to self-fund, or how are you going to do battle with one of the most deeply entrenched and well-funded Democratic parties in the country?
Well, one, so let's talk about the funding aspect. And you said celebrity and self-funders. I actually don't think people want either of that anymore. I think
Okay.
people are just done with that, right?
Okay.
Just say celebrity, that's done, right? I think we've maybe crossed into a different place with regards to our kind of public view of celebrities and I don't know, their endorsements and opinions and involvement in politics. So I don't think
I don't
that's
know. I think there are some exceptions. I mean, Republicans have done a good job with kind of adjacent, like somebody like a Tommy Tuberville, right? Or kind of like folks that are well known and loved in the states that are kind of like celebrities. I think the Democrats have done a shittier job of it, frankly. And Kamala Harris is out right now, and if she gets in, that may be to your advantage.
But
But I do still,
she's already opted out.
yeah, if Matthew McConaughey runs for governor of Maine, I think he destroys of Texas. I think he destroys everybody. I think Mark Cuban is maybe another situation. I
I
think
don't think I
there
don't
is a
think
power in there.
yeah, I don't think he has a chance, but I guess you're right. I think that if it's a McConaughey
And we're
who's
looking at a president who's the ultimate celebrity candidate, right? And Ronald Reagan, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Your state
oh,
likes these folks, right?
well,
So
Reagan, look, Reagan was a B actor. He wasn't a celebrity from acting.
okay,
Schwarzenegger is a huge celebrity, and he certainly won because of that. But he also won in a very shortened race, right? It was,
yep,
um, so, but
yep.
anyhow, to your point about funding. I don't have the ability to self-fund financially, and I wouldn't even if I did, because in the history of California, that, as you may know, there's never been a self-funded candidate who won an election, nor I believe should there be. I mean, I believe very deeply in the value of democracy, and I got to tell you, I understand why self-funders self-fund because it's hard work to go around and telling your story with your hat in hand saying, do you believe in me?
Mhm.
It's humbling, okay? It invites feedback that you might not like. It definitely involves accepting rejection, right? There's all kind, and it's just um, very energy consuming, right? Time and
Oh, you're
energy.
talking to a guy who's had to raise money for 20 years. I mean, it's soul sucking. But let me ask you a pointed question if I can, because you
Well,
have
but
run.
I just want to say that
Please go ahead.
that's also a valuable process to make a leader into a leader.
That's true.
To
It's true.
take someone from the outside who says, "Oh, gee, I woke up today. I think I want to be governor." I mean, that's free. It's very easy to do that. Now go walk the walk
It's
and do
true.
this and do what I'm doing.
Yeah.
That separates the men from the boys or the
And the market will determine whether or not you are adding value, to your point, right? Like if you can prove to the electorate that you add value, then you will see donations. But I want to ask you, because you've run the numbers, you're a very effective tactician and strategist. You said I can't afford it and I have to go. How much do you need? How much do you need to be competitive against a Democratic juggernaut in California?
Well, I think on the high end, the number is about $50 million, 25 million in the campaign coffers, and
Hmm.
ideally a super PAC that raises 25 million in support of my candidacy. I think that would be the dream number, what I'll call the fully funded number.
Hmm.
And when I asked my campaign manager, who's a veteran of 35 years of California campaign politics, um, what odds would you give me of succeeding and winning if I had that today? If the money was there, and he said 75, 80% is
Yeah.
your chance of winning. So really the gating issue, Paul, is getting the money to be known. I think
Right.
that it feels very weak, and I think my message is exactly what the public will want to hear.
I think we're going to find out for sure, right? And let me ask you, we're extending this interview a little bit because I really think it's important, Ethan, because you've thought this through. I really enjoy talking to you. I hope this is the beginning of a conversation that you can have with the state and with the country, and that you'll come back on the show. We've talked a little bit about issues. We've talked around issues, but I want to hit on one that I've brought up before that I think many independents are missing. I think many Democrats are missing, especially moderate Democrats. You're talking about taxes. Holy shit, somebody's talking about taxes, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I've talked about New York City and California and other places where people want to hear about taxes. And I saw your launch interview, I think, with Fox Business, and you're talking to the business community, and you're leading with your tax plan, which I think is smart and going to be applauded by many voters. But can you try to simplify for us your tax plan? Because it seems like your lead element, it's what you're coming out the gate with. It's, I assume, how you want to help tackle the homelessness and the affordability and everything else. But let me give you the floor for a minute or two to lay out your strategy for California taxes.
If you don't mind, before I do that, I want to also say that one of the differentiations that I'm very proud of is that unlike politicians, career politicians who are playing prevent defense, right? That's how they run their campaigns.
Hmm.
I'm playing offense every day. Okay. So I have today on my website, pennerforgovernor.com, already 4 position papers on 4 different policies. That's unheard of at any time, let alone 9.5 months before a primary. And because I'm proud of the ideas. We need ideas, and I'm running on ideas. I'm not running to obfuscate my thinking. I'm running proud of my ideas on how to fix this state. So when people vote for me, they're going to be voting for ideas that will give me the mandate to actually get them accomplished with the legislators. Now, as pertains to your question about taxes, people generally talk about taxes, especially guys that look like me, guys that come from the world I come from, and they generally are kind of let's cut taxes and let's cut government. That's really what you generally hear from guys like me. Um, and I think that's a losing message. I don't think that's the message that serves people. Okay. Forget
So
about,
guys like me, like you mean rich white guys, right?
well, I think that middle age, successful, Wall Street background, white guys. Yes. I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
so I want to make sure that people understand I'm not running. And I tell people, I have friends who are rich and I have friends that are poor. Remember, I still have most of my childhood friends from Yonkers still, and they didn't all make it. Okay. And
Hmm.
so when I tell people I'm not running to make rich people richer. Okay. They don't need my help in that regard. They're doing just fine. Okay. Government is not there for them. Government is there for them to make sure that the society is safe and that it's fair and that things work. And that's what I'm going to do for those people. But I'm primarily running to balance the scales a little bit because I think that, very much like Teddy Roosevelt in his time, he said, I'm going to save capitalism from itself because it has now created an imbalance, a gulf between the haves and the have-nots that is historic. And if it's not fixed, capitalism will die. There'll be a communist revolution that will kill capitalism. That was
Mhm.
what Teddy Roosevelt said more than 100 years ago. And I'm saying the same thing today. Okay. I love the inspirational power of free market capitalism, but today it needs to be saved from itself. We need a smart person who comes from that world, like I do, but also comes from the streets of Yonkers and is in touch with the people who are still in the streets with Yonkers. And that's all of us in California, too, the majority who need help from government and who are not making it, right? So I kind of feel like I combine those two in a beautiful way that can actually understand the system and not come up with idiotic answers like we hear from. I mean, there are politicians in California who I hear say, I'm for the worker, not for the business owner. And I'm thinking, if you drive out all the business owners, you're not for the worker. There's no jobs.
Right,
Okay.
right.
And it's just a poorly thought through approach. I will not have that.
So
So
you've got an approach you think is thought through on taxes. Lay it
well,
out.
yeah, so I think taxes are the headline for a state. It's either the welcome or the repel, right? Right now, our tax system is ranked 48th in the state by the Tax Foundation. It's a repel. It basically says, don't come here if you want to build a business. Don't come here if you make a lot of money. Don't come here if you create jobs. Get out of here. And so for 5 years, people have read that sign and have run away. Okay. And I think I have to change the sign to a sign that's green instead of red that says, welcome, we want you. Okay. But at the same time, and this can only be done by someone with a decent level of financial sophistication, I need to make sure that we still have the budget to actually make our system work for the many, many, many people who depend on our government for kind of the springboard that gives the opportunities for social mobility, that depend on education, that depend on all the services that government's supposed to provide. So cutting taxes and cutting government programs at this moment in time is idiotic, absolutely idiotic. So what I've done is I've created a tax system that shifts the way people are taxed, which is to say I've eliminated all income tax in the state of California, all of it. And I've replaced that and, by the way, gotten rid of our gas tax, which is extraordinarily penal on the working person who has to commute probably the furthest and pay the most for gas. Eliminated the gas tax, replaced all that plus our state sales tax, which is the highest in the country, with a single consumption tax. Now, people ask me, who's going to pay? Is this going to be, rich people pay less and poor people pay more? Of course not. Okay. Rich people will pay the same and maybe more, but it's going to feel really good because it's an optional tax. They're not going to be taxed because they're successful. They're going to be taxed because they spend the fruits of their success. And that feels great. So, okay, you want to buy a Lamborghini? Fantastic. I'm so happy for you that you could afford it. And now you get to pay a tax on that Lamborghini that goes to the government. Instead of you made a lot of money, we deserve some of it. That's bullshit, okay? It's just a dumb idea. We deserve what you made. No, we don't. But we do need money. And when you spend the bounty of your success, we're going to take some of that.
So I'm excited about this idea being percolated across America. And I saw Maria Bartiromo got excited about it. You could take that for what it's worth. But the
What's
idea.
better than the she not getting
Oh, but
excited?
here's the insight. It's kind of like almost and I without it's kind of like the pipe dream that Mamdani is putting out there, but from the other side, and maybe if you can execute it, and this is going to be the same challenge for Mamdani, and I'm not saying you're as radical as him, but it sounds really good. No income tax, no sales tax, no gas tax. Wow, that sounds awesome, right? But we have a consumption tax, which is you pay on what you bring, what you take.
Right. Right.
Um, and the devil's going to be in the execution here. You would obviously face huge institutional resistance. But I
I,
think,
I don't think so, Paul. I don't
no,
think so. I don't
come
think
on
that,
now. This
I
is the
don't
only one time I'm going to call bullshit. You don't
no,
think
I
you're
don't
going to face
no.
institutional
No, I
resistance if
don't
you
I
try
don't
to.
think there'll be any resistance. So the tax foundation, which ranks states by their tax policy, currently ranks us 48th. By the way,
Right.
New York's 50th and New Jersey's 49th, okay?
Hmm.
Um, they say with this tax, with my tax plan,
Yep.
exactly as it is, we'd be ranked third in the country
Mhm.
behind South
Because
Dakota.
you're saying that revenue won't change.
And revenue, oh no, well then I have the AEI, the American Enterprise Institute, which is arguably the preeminent financial and economic think tank in the world. They did a white paper that your readers can go look at on AEI.com. They posted it in analysis, a deep analysis of my plan. And not only will revenue not change, it'll grow. Okay. And
Okay.
then they used very conservative
So you
assumptions.
can drop taxes and not cut anything.
Exactly. We'll grow things. No, I want, but now here's the thing.
And here's a kicker. So okay. So what are bananas going to cost under this plan? I mean, you mentioned a Lamborghini, okay, but a gallon of milk or bananas. What are normal things that
Well,
people are consuming every day?
the most
What kind
important,
of a price increase would you expect to see?
yeah, the most important answer to your question is I need to make sure that I protect the people who are at the bottom of the socioeconomic food chain from an adverse outcome here, right? And so typically, the only argument that's ever made against a consumption tax is that it's regressive, right? Because if you, let's say you're making 50 grand, right?
Right. Right.
And in California, if you're making 50 grand today, you're paying practically no income tax. You're paying like $1,000 or something like that. So you have about $49,000 of spending power. However, there is a 10% sales tax, near 10% on many things. And there also is that nasty gas tax. So in reality, your 50 grand, when you pay some sales tax and you pay the gas tax, probably gives you about 46,000 or so, 45,000 of spending power. What we're going to do is we're basically giving people at or below the poverty level um, a rebate, but a prebate. So at the beginning of the year, they'll get a check from the government that is aimed to cover the consumption tax that they would incur. So they actually become better off because I'm eliminating that gas tax, I'm
Hmm.
eliminating that sales tax, and I'm now covering what is estimated to be their full load of their consumption tax. So if you made 50 grand in my plan, you'll have 50 grand of spending power, not 45 or 46.
Look, I am excited by this because I'm excited to push the boundaries of what the country has been hearing. You're going to need some really good fucking infographics. You're going to need some really good videos to break this down. And I'm sure you'll come up with those in ways to explain it. But I think it's pushing a conversation in the right place. And I think people are going to be excited by it. And I look forward to seeing you go into different media environments and different audiences. And you said, leaders or teachers, you're going to have to do a bit of teaching on this one. But I think it's going to force a national conversation that's probably overdue, especially in places like New York and California. So I'm excited about that. We've had a lot of time to talk. And I'd love to talk forever, but I want to, even this podcast, I don't want to go forever. So I'm going to ask you to stick around for some extra content for our
Sure.
Patreon members. We're going to ask you the waffles question, the car question, and a couple others. Big shout out to our Patreon members. Thank you for supporting the show. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and share. We're going to continue to bring you independent ideas, especially in a time when free speech is under attack. And we're going to bring leaders that need the microphone. And I think Ethan Penner is a great example of that. So thank you to all of you who make these conversations possible. Ethan, I want to finish with two questions for you. One's an easy one. So you're from Yonkers, but you live in LA. The Chargers are playing the Giants this weekend. Who are you rooting for in that one?
Charger.
Ah,
You remember my dad?
is that a political answer? You better
No,
root
it's,
for the
no,
Chargers
it's
now.
not. So on the football side, Paul, I started off my first year. I was born in the Bronx and lived fairly close to Yankee Stadium. And so I started off life when I became aware of sports as a Giants fan. Um, the Giants were the worst in the NFL. And back then it was the NFL and the AFL.
Right.
And the Jets, if you remember, had Joe Namath and they were on their way to winning a Super Bowl. But I grew up in the then I moved to Yonkers, which is a tough place. And
Yonkers is kind of like North Bronx, basically.
yeah, and there's a premium on being tough. The
Yeah.
AFL was not a tough league. The NFL was the tough league. And so I had to pick an NFL team to be my favorite team. And the Giants were the worst, really horribly bad. So for some reason, the Vikings caught my attention in 1969 or 70, and I became a Vikings fan, and I've been a Vikings fan ever since. There's something about the Vikings that grabbed me. They played in the cold. Of course, they don't anymore. They were tough as hell. They were great.
The
So like,
tough teams. They play in the cold. The Purple People Eaters. I mean,
yeah,
I like the Vikings. I like, they used to call it the NFC North, the NFC North, right? I mean, you've got the middle
they was
America.
the Central at that time. But I
Yeah.
but I but I I also like the Chargers because my dad moved to San Diego in 1970, and I've been following the Chargers ever since. So the Chargers are an easy team for me to like.
All right. Well, they are red hot, and I'm hoping that Jackson Dart and Cam Scadaboo can slow them down. Last question I ask of all of our candidates, Ethan. So a lot of folks are getting to know you for the first time, whether they're in California or they're somewhere else. And this is going to be a challenge. Try to shrink it down to a minute or so. But why should folks support you right now? There's so much going on in the world. California maybe is far away, but why should folks support your independent candidacy right now?
California is on the verge of falling off the over the cliff into the ocean, just like New York is. I think that our country is in a very difficult spot. California is the most important. Maybe New York is close to it. And if we lose New York and California as functional places, the country has a very, very bleak future. I'm the only one with competence and empathy. It's a very easy answer.
I like that answer. I love California. Like I said, it's one of my favorite places in the world. And I obviously love New York. And if things get really crazy and New York and California secede, I would definitely pick New York over the alternative. So it's New York or nowhere for me, and I know it's California or nowhere for you. And I really appreciate this conversation, Ethan. I'm excited for you to launch your candidacy. I'm excited for more people to get to know you, especially in the independent community. But also, I think you're the kind of candidate that will bring over people who are independent curious, who are independent adjacent. We've said for a long time, independents are kind of like Seattle Supersonics basketball fans. They love the game, but they don't have a team. And if you bring a team then that they can root for, they're going to come out. And I think that there's a lot of independents in California who are moderate, who are centrist, who are saying none of the above, who want an alternative, who are going to be excited about your candidacy. And I think it's going to help people understand the landscape in California and the primary system that we've been talking about so much, because we need leaders, but we also need structural reform. And we're rooting for you to tackle both of those things. Patreon members, stick around. Ethan's going to stay with us. Thank you so much, Ethan, for your leadership, for stepping up, and go Giants. All right, that was a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to find us on YouTube and go to independentamericans.us, where you can watch the video, you can get merchandise, you can join our Patreon community. And if you really like this, chip in $2. Just $2 an episode will help us keep bringing independent content far and wide and speaking truth to power. Free speech is under attack right now, especially from this White House. And by supporting independent Americans, you are supporting the people and me and others fighting back against that. So give us $2 an episode if you can, and spread the word. Subscribe. Independent Americans is going to continue to bring conversations that are at the intersection of politics, national security, culture, everything that's happening in America. We're going to try to bring light to contrast the heat. So check us out at independentamericans.us. Spread the word and tell people to declare their independence. Leave the herds, declare your independence, and support independent Americans right now. Thank you for being a part of this movement. Until next time, stay vigilant, America. You can also see back episodes in our archives with really cool guests ranging from Sarah Jessica Parker to actor Jeffrey Wright to John Bernthal, to Mick Foley of WWE fame, former Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, Medal of Honor recipients like Flo Groberg, Ambassador Susan Rice. We've got a lot of folks in the archives. Go back and check them out. Really cool conversations that you should spread far and wide and enjoy in audio or video. And invite others to declare their independence, because we're continuing to put country over party, people over politics, busting up the status quo and fueling a new movement that is manifesting itself in all these new candidates that I am having on this show and many more to come. We're adding light to contrast the heat in America. No, you are not alone in your vigilance. We're all vigilant. and we're all in this together. Thanks for listening and watching. I'm your host, Paul Rieckhoff. Until next time, wherever you are, stay vigilant, America. Stay vigilant. Powered by Righteous Media.